Here's the most provocative claim I can make about the world you are living in. It is exactly what the Bible predicted. Not approximately, not generally, exactly. The egalitarianism, the collectivism, the dissolution of reason, the redefinition of sex, the deification of the self, the march toward totalitarian control dressed as liberation. Every feature of the late modern world is the precise structural, feature-by-feature inversion of the millennium God declared was coming. The world is not drifting away from God randomly. It is building the counterfeit of his declared future with the urgency of people who can't help reaching for a shape they did not invent and cannot achieve, because the shape belongs to the one they rejected. And I want to make a second claim that will offend almost everyone, and I mean everyone. The secular progressive world and the Christian church are both, right now, doing the same thing. Both are substituting the self-generated for the externally given. Both are building a counterfeit of something God declared. Both were warned this would happen, and neither knows it is happening. That is not a political observation, it's a prophetic one. The prophecy that describes both of their conditions was written centuries before either of them existed. The Bible is a prophetic book. Everyone knows that. What almost no one has noticed is that the world is also a prophetic book, and that its prophecy is the precise inversion of the Bible's own. Every utopia the modern world has attempted to build is a recognizable feature-by-feature mirror image of the millennium God declared he would build himself. And the proof that God's declaration is real is not first a theological argument, it's the existence and the failure of the counterfeit. You can't invert what was never declared. You can't parody what does not exist. A world has been proving the Bible true by failing to replace it for 6,000 years, and it does not know it. Look at the world being built around you. The world that most educated, the most idealistic, the most morally serious people of our time are constructing with the full force of their intelligence, their institutions, their technology, their conviction that they are on the right side of history. You see the project of universal human unity, the gathering of peoples under a single set of values, a single framework of rights, a single conception of human dignity that transcends every natural, cultural, and religious boundary. You see the aspiration to end war, not through the superiority of one nation's military, but through international institutions, collective agreements, and the progressive obsolescence of armed conflict as a means of resolving human disputes. You see the demand for universal knowledge, the democratization of access to information, the dismantling of every gatekeeping hierarchy that has historically controlled who gets to know what, the insistence that no perspective has privileged access to truth. You see the project of abolishing arbitrary power, the systematic dismantling of every hierarchy not ratified by the consent of the governed, the elevation of the collective human will as the only legitimate ground of authority. And you see the demand for a single name, a universal standard, a comprehensive framework of values that will organize all human life under a common account of what it means to flourish. Now, that was the early form of the project, the Enlightenment form, the form that still carried, however distantly, the dignity of the original it was counterfeiting, that still believed in reason, in progress, in the perfectibility of the human being through the application of human intelligence to human problems. It was wrong about the mechanism. It was not yet wrong about everything. But a counterfeit left to itself does not stabilize. It metastasizes. When the revealed is replaced by self-constructed, when the transcendence is displaced by the immanent, when the externally given is substituted by the humanly produced, the project does not simply fail to arrive at its destination, it collapses inward. The energy that was directed outward toward the utopian horizon turns back on itself, and what was idealism becomes pathology. This is the later stage, the stage we are now in. The project of universal knowledge, the democratization of truth, has become the abolition of truth, not the universalizing of access to a real ground, but the dissolution of the ground itself. Reason, the instrument the Enlightenment enthroned, has been dethroned by the very tradition it produced, declared a cultural construct, a power mechanism, a tool of oppression. The capacity to reason toward a stable worldview, to argue from evidence to conclusion, to hold a position accountable to something outside the self, is no longer the aspiration. It is the suspicion. The inability to reason is not lamented. It is celebrated as authenticity. The project of universal human dignity has become the abolition of the human. The body, the one thing the human being did not construct and cannot reconstruct, has become the primary site of the autonomous will's demand for total sovereignty. Sex, which is given, must be made to yield to gender, which is chosen, because the autonomous project cannot tolerate the existence of anything about the human being that was not produced by the human being. What cannot be controlled must be redefined. What cannot be redefined must be denied. The result is not the liberation of the human person, it is the dismantling of the category of the human person from within. The project of abolishing arbitrary power has become the most aggressive drive toward totalitarian control of Western civilization, not despite the progressive program, but through it. Every socialist and communist experiment in the history of the modern world has produced the same result: the concentration of power in the hands of those who administer the collective's declared future. The elimination of every institution and every person who represents an authority the collective did not produce. The reduction of the individual to a function of the state's prophetic project. It has never produced the millennium. It has produced the gulag, the Cultural Revolution, the killing fields, the secret police, the show trial, the disappeared, the engineered famine, the re-education camp, because a human prophecy that cannot be questioned can only be enforced. And the enforcement without an external standard of justice is simply power without a name. The project of gathering peoples under a single name has become rampant narcissism. The individual as the ultimate unit of meaning. The self as the only legitimate authority over the self. The interior life is the only real world. The universal has collapsed into the personal. The aspiration toward a name above all names has inverted into the insistence that there is no name above the self's own name. That the self defines its own identity, its own values, its own truth, its own gender, its own reality, and that any claim from outside the self that contradicts the self's self-definition is an act of violence. Sexual immorality is not merely normalized, but sacralized, because the autonomous self's sovereignty over its own body is the last remaining absolute in a world that has abolished every other one. The family, the one social institution not produced by the state or the market, is systematically dismantled because it represents a loyalty of an authority the autonomous project did not generate and cannot fully control. This is what happens when the transcendent is replaced by the immanent, and the immanent is left to run its own logic to its own conclusion. The early utopian project at least had the dignity of reaching outward, toward a future, toward a collective, toward something larger than the individual self. The late form has turned entirely inward. The millennium has not arrived. The counterfeit is consuming itself. All of this was written in the structure of what it was always counterfeiting. A world without the revealed, without the externally given, supernaturally confirmed, prophetically declared ground does not merely fail to reach its declared destination, it disintegrates in the precise manner that the absence of that good ground produces: the loss of a stable epistemology, the collapse of a common account of the human, the war of each against all dressed as liberation, the tyranny of the collective dressed as justice, the deification of the self dressed as dignity. The counterfeit millennium, in its late form, is not merely failing to arrive. It is demonstrating in real time, in the condition of every society that has committed to it most fully, exactly what the prophetic word said would happen to a world that refused to love the truth and was given over to the strong delusion. Now open your Bible to Isaiah 2 and read this. Now open to Isaiah 11. Open to Zechariah 14. And now ask yourself this question. Is the world you're watching being built a new thing? Or is it the oldest project in human history, wearing the newest available technology and the most sophisticated available ideology, reaching for a shape it did not invent and cannot achieve, because the shape was declared long before the project began? This video is not primarily about the world. It's about something more uncomfortable. It's about the fact that messianic prophetic revelation, the specific publicly declared, historically confirmed announcement of the coming order, is not merely the ground the world has rejected. It is the ground the church has displaced. And that displacement was itself declared in advance by the same prophetic word the church displaced. We are living inside a prophecy. The world's false millennium and the church's prophesied dysfunction are both running on the schedule of the divine declaration that announced them before they existed. And the proof that the divine declaration is real is not first a theological argument. It's the existence of the counterfeit. Messianic prophecy is not, he said this and this happened. It is the declaration of the shape of the future, specific, written, publicly announced, that no human system declared before it and no human project has been able to produce since. Tonight we read it, and we set it against what the world is building, feature by feature, text by text, so that the structure is visible. Let me state the argument directly before we build it. History is not a contest between religion and secularism, between tradition and progress, between theism and atheism, as both conservatives and liberals will tell you. Those are the surface categories. The deep structure of history is a contest between two prophetic claims, two declarations about the future, two accounts of what is coming and who will bring it. The first prophetic claim is the divine one. God, through the prophets of Israel, declared a specific coming order, its features, its mechanism of arrival, its ground, and the person through whom it would be established. The declaration was not vague spiritual aspiration. It was specific, written, publicly accessible, and confirmed in its initial fulfillments in the person and death and vindication of the Messiah, in correspondence with the prior declaration, in the sight of witnesses who did not expect it, in a form no human arrangement engineered. The second prophetic claim is the human one. The autonomous human project in every generation and every culture, in every theological form from Babel to the present, has been making a prophetic claim, not merely describing a desirable future, declaring it, announcing it as coming, insisting that the historical process is moving toward it, and that the right human effort will bring it in. These two prophetic claims are not merely competing. They are structurally parallel because the human prophetic claim is always counterfeit of the divine one. It always reaches the same shape: universal gathering, the end of conflict, universal knowledge, just authority, a single name above all names. Every human utopia is reaching for these features. And every human utopia fails to produce them, because the features were declared by a God who alone can bring them in. And the human project is attempting to build them from within the same system that produced the disorder they are meant to resolve. The proof of the divine prophetic claim is therefore not first an argument. It is the existence and the failure of the counterfeit. A world that cannot stop reaching for the shape of the millennium in every generation, in the face of every failure, is a world bearing unwitting testimony to the reality of the declaration that generated the shape it is reaching for. Now, there's one criteria for distinguishing the real prophetic claim from the counterfeit. God himself stated it in Isaiah 41, 22, and 23. Declare the former things. Announce what is coming before the world can anticipate it. Bring it to pass in correspondence with the prior declaration. That is the criterion. Every human prophetic claim, Marx, the Enlightenment, progressive liberalism, transhumanism, secular humanism, fails at exactly that point. Not one of them has declared a former thing. Not one has announced what was coming from ancient times. Not one has brought its declared future to pass in a form no human arrangement produced. The divine prophetic claim has met the criterion. That is the thesis. Now let us build it. The human prophetic project did not begin with Marx or the Enlightenment. It began with the beginning. Genesis 3:5. You will be like God, knowing good and evil. That is the prophetic claim. The serpent is declaring a coming state, what the human being will be, what it will know, what it will become, by an act of autonomous self-determination from within. The fall is not first a moral failure. It is an epistemological and prophetic one. It is the original human declaration of the human future, made from within, from the resources of the human will, against the declaration of the God who speaks from without. Genesis 11 is the first collective form of the same claim. Babel is a prophecy, a declaration of the coming order of the human community that will build it will build for itself a single center, a gathered humanity, a name above all names, a tower reaching to the heavens. Every feature of the coming millennium declared and executed from within. The judgment of Babel is the refusal to allow the human prophecy to be mistaken for the divine one. the dispersal of the self-generated gathering so that the authenticity of the transcendentally gathered one will be recognizable when it arrives. Every subsequent form of the human prophetic project is Babel. The technology advances. The ideological justification becomes more sophisticated. The structure is identical. Marx declared the classless society the inevitable terminus of the dialectical movement of history, a prophecy made from within, failing the Isaiah 41 criterion at every point. The Enlightenment declared the triumph of reason, the progressive displacement of superstition and tyranny by human rational capacity, a prophecy made from within, never declared before the conditions that produce it existed. Progressive liberalism declares the arc of the moral universe bending toward justice, a prophecy made from within, no former things declared, no appointed time announced. Transhumanism declares the technological transcendence of human limitation, death, disease, a biological constraint overcome by human ingenuity. The most explicit modern attempt to produce the millennium's features by human hands from human resources, a prophecy made from within. Secular humanism declares the self-sufficient human community, the order in which human beings, freed from every external authority, govern themselves by their own reason, the logical terminus of the project that began in Genesis 3, a prophecy made from within. Not one of these has met the Isaiah 41 criterion. Not one has declared a former thing. Not one has brought its declared future to pass in a form no human arrangement produced. But all of them are reaching for the same shape. And that is the first proof that the shape was declared before any of them began. Now let us map the human prophetic project against the divine one with precision. The false millennium began, a millennium being built now, set against the true one already declared, feature by feature, so that the inversion is visible in its structural detail. The false millennium produces collectivism, the dissolution of human, particularly into the collective will, replacing the transcendent center with the immanent one. A center produced by the gathered cannot stand above the gathered. It can only reflect the power dynamics already present. The gathering becomes enforced uniformity. The universal standard becomes the standard of whoever holds the power to enforce it. But the true millennium declares this: voluntary, particular nations remaining nations, streaming to a center not produced by any of them, the only kind of gathering that does not become the dominance of the strongest. The false millennium produces the enforced peace of international institutions, collectively produced authority that is in principle external to all nations, but in practice produced by the most powerful among them. Always fragile, always subject to defection by any party powerful enough to resist. Not a just peace, a managed tension. The true millennium declares the end of war is the product of a just adjudication whose standard is external to all parties, the one whose judgment cannot be corrupted, whose authority was demonstrated before any of the nations existed. The false millennium produces epistemological egalitarianism, the elimination of the external standard rather than the universalizing of access to it, Not universal knowledge, universal ignorance dressed as universal wisdom. Every consciousness its own center. Every perspective its own truth. The true millennium declares universal, pervasive, non-institutionally mediated. Not the dissolution of the standard, but the arrival of the standard in its fullness, available to every human being because its ground is the publicly examinable correspondence between what was declared and what occurred. The false millennium produces the deification of human will. Vox populi as vox Dei in its democratic form. The dictator embodying the collective's destiny is totalitarian form. In both, the authority meant to end arbitrary power is itself arbitrarily grounded. No human authority can end arbitrary power because every human authority is produced by the same system that arbitrary power exploits. The true millennium declares, and Psalm 72. The authority that ends arbitrary power is not produced by the system it governs. Its wisdom comes not from what its eyes see in the political dynamics of the moment, but from the Spirit of the Lord, declared before he came, confirmed after the declaration, governing on the only ground that cannot be corrupted. The false millennium is constitutively hostile to transcendence not produced by or accountable to the human system. A human prophecy cannot coexist with a genuinely external prophetic authority because the existence of such an authority is the refutation of the human prophecy's foundational claim. This is why every form of the autonomous millennial project suppresses the messianic prophetic revelation specifically, because a fulfilled divine prophecy is the standing demonstration that the Isaiah 41 criterion has been met by someone other than the human project. The true millennium declares, the name that is one is not a human candidate elevated to universality. It is the demonstrated reality of the God who declared the former things, confirmed in history, acknowledged on that day, not as a doctrinal position imposed on the nations, but as the undeniable reality the nations finally recognized for what has always been. The false millennium produces institutions that claim permanence and demonstrate fragility. The Roman Empire, the Third Reich, the Soviet Union, every ideology that announced the end of history. Each declared its own permanence. Each is either already gone or going. The true millennium declares this. And here in Isaiah 65:17. The kingdom that cannot be destroyed is not the product of a superior human political arrangement. It is a sovereign act of the God who declared it before it arrived, standing because its ground is not the continued will of any human constituency, but the internal purpose of the God who does not change. Now the inversion is proof. Now let us place the two side by side, not as a table of theological categories, but as the visible structural argument the contrast itself makes. Six features, six inversions, six precise correspondences between the shape the world cannot stop reaching for, and the shape God declared before the world began reaching. This is the image of God in the fallen human race. The declaration written into human nature itself that there is a shape of the future toward which human existence is oriented, and that the human being cannot rest until it arrives. The image of God is not erasable by the fall. It is only invertible. And the inversion is always recognizable by the inversion of the same original. Every communist manifesto is an inverted Isaiah 2. Every progressive utopia is a debased Isaiah 11. Every universal ideology is a counterfeit Zechariah 14. Every transhumanist dream is a parody of Isaiah 65. And the persistence of the aspiration, its reoccurrence in every generation, is the face of every failure, is the most sustained and least acknowledged argument for the reality of the transcendent declaration that generated the shape being reached for. You cannot parody what does not exist. The counterfeit proves the original. The most compelling evidence that the Messianic prophetic revelation is the living center of this contest is not the condition of the secular world. It is the condition of the church. The community that possesses the prophetic revelation, that has Isaiah 2 and Isaiah 11 and Zechariah 14 and Psalm 72 and Daniel 2 in its canon, that names the Messiah as the center of its worship, has done to Messianic prophecy precisely what the hostile world did to the Messiah. It has sidelined it, replaced it with self-generated conceptual and material alternatives, declared itself faithful in doing so, and remained largely blind to what it has done. The church is Exhibit A, demonstrating from the inside, in the community that possesses the revelation, the same structural suppression of the transcendent phenomena that the whole world demonstrates from the outside. The world begins the counterfeit millennium. The church manages the counterfeit faith. The concept substituted for the phenomenon, the institutionally processed, theologically packaged, experientially domesticated version of the Messiah accepted in place of the prophetically declared and historically confirmed one. And this condition was declared in advance by the same prophetic word the church displaced. Read 1 Timothy 4:1. The departure is not first from the name of Christ. It is from the faith, the prophetically grounded emunah, the recognition of God, of truth, in his declared and fulfilled act. What replaces it is teaching that substitutes a self-generated, institutionally managed concept of the divine for the externally given, supernaturally confirmed phenomenon in Scripture. Let's read 2 Timothy 4 here. Sound teaching, grounded in the prophetically declared and historically confirmed reality, will not be endured. The community will prefer teachers who suit their own passions, the warm, the institutionally comfortable, the conceptually manageable, over the ground that is a publicly demonstrable transcendent phenomenon the community did not produce and cannot control. Read 2 Thessalonians 2 here. The strong delusion falls on those who preferred something else in place of the truth. It is not a grotesque error easily identified. It is compelling, institutionally established, experienced as genuine faith, a genuine conviction that the concept is the phenomenon, that the institution's mediation is the transcendent ground, that the experience of the self before its own image of God is the recognition of the God who declared the former things. Let's read John 5. Listen, the one who comes in the Father's name arrives at the prophetically declared and historically confirmed fulfillment of the transcendent word. From outside the human system, not accountable to the categories of human religious apparatus brings to the act of reception. The one who comes in his own name comes from within, producible by the system that receives him, fitting its categories, meeting its expectations, manageable. This is the logic of every substitution the church has made. The sacramental apparatus comes in its own name. The theological system comes in its own name. The devotional culture comes in its own name. Each is received because each is producible from within the human religious system. Each displaces the one whose ground is the correspondence between what was announced from ancient times and what occurred in history in the sight of witnesses. Let us read Matthew 24. The deception is compelling. The signs and wonders of the false prophetic claims are genuine. They produce real conviction. They are not obviously counterfeit. They carry the shape of the truth without its ground. And John 12. The prophetic declaration, the announced and fulfilled word, is itself the judge. Not the institution, not the theological system, not the experiential culture. To have had it in one's possession and to have displaced it from the vital center in favor of something the human religious system generated from within. That is the precise form of the judgment the verse declares. The most devastating feature of this condition is not the displacement itself. It's the blindness to this displacement. The church does not know it has done this. It experiences itself as faithful, preaching the gospel, administering the sacraments, maintaining the theological tradition. The blindness is not feigned. It's the strong delusion Paul described. The genuine incapacity to see that what has been substituted for the phenomena is a concept, and that concept, however sincerely held, is not the thing. And this blindness is itself the fulfillment of the prophetic word that declared it. The church, in its dysfunction with respect to messianic prophecy, is not merely failing, it is prophesying. It is demonstrating from the inside the reality of the transcendent declaration it has displaced from its center. The world's aspiration and the church's dysfunction were both declared before they existed. Both are running on the schedule of the divine prophetic claim. Both will be displaced, not by an argument, but by the arrival of the one whose coming was announced before the world was ready to receive him. The prophecy that will end all prophecies. Messianic prophecy is not, he said this and this happened. It is the declaration of the shape of the future, specific, written, publicly announced, that no human system declared before it and no human project has been able to produce since. And the proof of its reality is written in the failure of every attempt to build it from within. The world's idealists have been declaring the future for 6,000 years. Not one of their declarations has been confirmed in correspondence with a prior announcement. Not one of their declared futures has arrived in a form no human arrangement produced. The God of Israel declared the future once. in specific written publicly preserved prophetic texts, and confirmed his declaration in the person and death and vindication of Messiah, in the sight of witnesses who did not expect it. The confirmation is the standing demonstration of his prophetic authority, and the future he declared does not end with Messiah's first coming. It continues to the millennium. The order that has been running in parallel with every human counterfeit since Babel, the original of which, every utopia, has been an unwitting parody, the reality toward which the fallen human race has been reaching in inverted form in every generation, because the image of God cannot be suppressed entirely, only inverted. And the inversion is always recognizable as the inversion of the same original. The church's task is not to build the millennium and not to oppose those who are trying to build it. It is to lift up the prophetic word that declared it, the one prophetic claim in human history that has met the Isaiah 41 criterion, and to point to the correspondence between what was announced and what occurred as the ground of confidence that what has not yet arrived will arrive on schedule as declared by the sovereign act of the God who does not lie. The council will stand. The purpose will be accomplished. Not because the human project has been persuaded to stop, not because the church has recovered the ground it displaced, but because the prophecy that preceded both of them and outlasted every failure of both of them and generated every counterfeit of both of them was never theirs to fulfill. It was declared from outside. It will arrive from outside. And when it arrives, the contest between the two prophetic claims will end. Not in argument, in demonstration. And it was declared from ancient times that it would.